There's something strangely personal about a parking spot. It's not just a painted rectangle on the ground, it's a small slice of order in a chaotic world, a space that says, you belong here. For Alex Turner, that spot, the one right near the office doors, with his name neatly stenciled in white letters, wasn't just a convenience. It was a symbol of the years he'd put into his job, the late nights, the deadlines, the respect he had earned. But that sense of belonging began to crumble one Monday morning. Alex arrived early, as he always did, coffee in one hand, laptop bag in the other. The weather was perfect, the kind of crisp morning that makes the start of a workweek almost bearable. Yet, as he turned the corner into the lot, his mood dropped instantly. His spot was occupied, and not by a visitor, or a company vehicle, but by a sleek black BMW that definitely wasn't his. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone new didn't realize the spaces were assigned. But when he walked inside and saw the smug grin on the face of a young contractor named Kyle, something in him shifted. It was the kind of expression that didn't need words to say, I can do whatever I want. The next day, the same thing happened. And the day after that. Soon, Kyle wasn't alone. Two more of his friends, contractors hired for a special tech project, started parking in the reserved section too. The small corner of the lot meant for long-term employees began to look like their personal playground. When Alex complained to HR, he was told it would be looked into. It wasn't. Management seemed too busy or too indifferent to care. Weeks passed, and the same disrespect continued. It wasn't just about a parking spot anymore, it was about what it represented. Years of loyalty, being brushed aside by people who hadn't even been there 6 months. Each morning became a small humiliation. Each afternoon, a reminder that the rules meant nothing if the wrong people broke them. Alex started noticing more. The contractors came in late, left early, and spent more time laughing in the break room than working. They strutted around like they owned the place, charming some, irritating others. They were talented, no one could deny that, but they were also reckless. And when people like that start to feel untouchable, they usually are, until someone decides otherwise. Alex wasn't a confrontational man. He wasn't loud, he wasn't petty. But he was patient, methodical, and observant, the kind of person who quietly collects details while everyone else underestimates him. Every morning, he snapped a quick photo of the cars in his spot, time-stamped and dated. He took notes about when they arrived, when they left, even the times they disappeared for long lunches. It started as proof for HR, just in case they finally decided to act. But as days turned into weeks, the documentation grew into something else, a quiet collection of evidence, a record of disrespect, a story waiting for its ending. Then one Friday afternoon, something happened that sealed their fate. Alex overheard the 3 contractors joking in the cafeteria. They were mocking the company's policies, bragging about how they'd landed multiple offers elsewhere, and how this boring old office was lucky to have them. But the part that really caught Alex's attention was when one of them mentioned their contracts, how they were up for renewal soon, and how it didn't matter what management thought, because they had connections. Alex didn't move. He didn't react. But inside, the plan began to take shape. Because what they didn't know was that the contract review process, the one that determined whether temporary workers became permanent, passed directly through the operations review team. And Alex was on it, that evening, as the parking lot lights flickered to life and the BMWs gleamed under the sodium glow. Alex stood by his car and stared at the space that had started all of this. He realized that revenge wasn't always about anger, sometimes, it was about correction. About restoring balance in a system that had lost it. He opened his phone, scrolled through his gallery of neatly dated photos, and smiled faintly. The proof was all there. The only thing left was to use it, at the right moment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the empty lot looked peaceful again. But Alex knew the peace wouldn't last. Because this wasn't over. Not yet. And next week's operations review meeting? That would change everything. When Monday arrived, the parking lot looked the same as always, the sleek BMW parked arrogantly in Alex's spot, the other two contractors' cars scattered across reserved spaces that didn't belong to them. But what had changed was Alex. He wasn't frustrated anymore. He wasn't angry. He was focused. The Operations Review Committee met once every quarter. Its purpose was simple: evaluate the company's contract workers and decide who would be renewed, promoted, or quietly let go. It wasn't glamorous, and most people saw it as a routine bureaucratic process. But to Alex, this time, it was personal. He had spent the entire weekend organizing his evidence. Every photo neatly labeled with dates, times, and short notes. Each incident documented. He didn't have to exaggerate or twist the facts, the truth was more than enough. By the time he walked into the meeting room, Alex looked calm, prepared, and confident. Around the large oval table sat department heads, project leads, and HR representatives, the decision-makers who had ignored his earlier complaints. As the meeting began, they went over the usual agenda. Productivity numbers, performance summaries, and renewal lists. The three contractors, Kyle and his friends, were near the top. Their team had delivered solid technical results, though their attitude had caused quiet ripples of resentment across departments. But no one had connected those dots yet. Then it was Alex's turn to speak. He started by outlining their contributions, acknowledging that their work had been valuable. Then, with measured calmness, he shifted tone. He talked about professionalism, integrity, and respect, how those values were as essential to company culture as productivity. That's when he brought out his files. He showed timestamps of repeated parking violations, not once or twice, but nearly every day for over a month. He showed photos of the cars in reserved spaces, one clearly marked, reserved for Alex Turner. Then he shared attendance records he had quietly logged, late arrivals, early departures, unexplained absences. The room fell silent. HR reviewed the evidence on the spot. It was undeniable. Even the department head who had been defending the contractors moments earlier began to shift uncomfortably in his seat. What had seemed like a small workplace annoyance now looked like a pattern of arrogance and disregard for company rules. Alex didn't ask for punishment. He didn't suggest what should happen. He simply presented the truth, and let it speak for itself. The review continued, but the tone had changed. Every member of the committee began viewing those contractors differently, not as ambitious go-getters, but as liabilities. By the end of the session, the decision was unanimous. Their contracts would not be renewed. It was quiet justice, no confrontation, no outburst, just a quiet stroke of a pen that decided their future. Later that day, HR sent out official notices. The contractors were thanked for their time and told that their current projects would be their last. Alex didn't celebrate. He didn't smirk or brag. He just stepped outside, looked across the parking lot, and saw the same cars parked in the same wrong spots, but for the last time. Because by the end of the week, they would be gone. That evening, as he drove home, Alex reflected on how differently people handle disrespect. Some shout, some argue, some quit. But he'd learned that the best revenge wasn't loud, it was precise, patient, and devastatingly effective. The next few days brought a strange shift in the office. Whispers spread quickly. People had noticed the contractors packing their desks, boxes stacked beside them, faces pale with disbelief. No one said anything directly to Alex, but many knew he had something to do with it. The same managers who had ignored his complaints now seemed suddenly attentive, even complimentary. "Great work on the review," they'd say. "You always keep things professional." Alex accepted the praise with polite nods, though deep down, he knew the lesson wasn't just for the contractors, it was for everyone who had looked the other way when respect was being tested. By Friday afternoon, the lot was empty again. His name on the asphalt gleamed under the sunlight. The BMW was gone. The other cars were gone. The space was his again. But as peaceful as it looked, Alex knew this story wasn't quite finished. Because the fallout from the review had reached further than he'd expected. The project those contractors were handling had no immediate replacements. Deadlines were looming, clients were growing impatient, and the higher-ups were scrambling to find a solution. And in a twist that no one saw coming, Alex, the quiet employee they had overlooked, was about to become the one person who could fix it. The same people who ignored his voice were about to rely on him entirely. And he planned to make the most of that opportunity. Because sometimes revenge doesn't end when they lose, it ends when you win. By the following Monday, the air in the office felt heavier than usual. The laughter that used to echo from the contractor's corner was gone, replaced by the quiet rhythm of keyboards and murmured phone calls. The parking lot looked emptier, too. No more shiny BMW in Alex's spot, no more carelessly parked cars crowding the reserved section. The world, in a small and almost poetic way, had reset itself. But behind that calm, a storm was brewing inside the company. Without the contractors, deadlines were falling behind. The project they had been leading, a new internal software system, had reached a critical phase. With their departure, the progress files were incomplete, documentation missing, and access credentials locked away behind forgotten passwords. It was a disaster waiting to explode. Meetings were called. Managers argued. HR panicked. The department head who once defended the contractors now sat with his head in his hands, realizing the cost of his misplaced confidence. Every conversation in the building began with the same anxious question: who's going to fix this? That's when Alex's name came up. He had been part of the operations team long enough to understand how every part of the company worked, from logistics to IT. He knew how the systems integrated, where the weak points were, and who to talk to when something broke. He had trained half of the people now struggling to keep things together. So when his supervisor knocked on his cubicle and asked if he could take a look, Alex simply nodded. No need for dramatics. He dove into the chaos, quietly, efficiently, and with the kind of focus that only comes from someone who's been underestimated for too long. Within a week, Alex had reorganized the entire project plan. He restored missing files, restructured the workflow, and even streamlined processes that the contractors had overcomplicated. What took them 3 months to build, Alex refined in less than 10 days. Soon, the department that once overlooked him was hanging on his every word. He wasn't just fixing their mistakes, he was saving the company from potential loss. His calm leadership began attracting attention beyond his own division. Senior executives started showing up in meetings where he presented progress updates. They listened, really listened, for the first time. What had started as an act of quiet revenge was turning into something bigger: recognition. And recognition, in the right hands, is power. By the end of the quarter, the project was back on track, faster, cleaner, and more efficient than before. The higher-ups praised the turnaround as a miracle. But inside the company, everyone knew whose hands had worked that miracle. One Friday afternoon, Alex was called into the conference room, the same one where he'd once presented evidence against the contractors. But this time, the energy was different. The executives were there, smiling, papers laid neatly across the table. They thanked him for his dedication, his professionalism, his initiative. Then, with a tone of finality, they announced that he was being promoted to operations lead. A new position. More pay. His own team at IT was the kind of recognition he had once hoped for, back when he still believed that hard work alone was enough. But now, he understood something deeper: sometimes, respect isn't given, it's earned through quiet precision. That evening, Alex left the office later than usual. The sun was setting, bathing the lot in golden light. His name still shone on his parking spot, but now it meant something more than just a reserved space. It was a symbol of patience rewarded, arrogance undone, and balance restored. As he unlocked his car, he noticed something. The same HR manager who once brushed off his complaints was now walking toward him, waving politely. The tone had changed. The respect was real. Alex smiled, nodded back, and drove away, calm, composed, victorious. In the weeks that followed, stories about the contractor's downfall spread quietly through professional circles. They'd tried to join other companies, but word about their behavior had followed them. Their arrogance had burned bridges they hadn't even noticed existed. Meanwhile, Alex thrived. His leadership brought stability to his team. The parking lot stayed orderly. The company culture began to shift, little by little, towards something better. All because one man refused to let a small act of disrespect go unanswered. Sometimes, revenge isn't loud. It doesn't need shouting, confrontation, or chaos. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is watching the system that failed you bend in your favor, slowly, inevitably, perfectly. They took his parking spot. He took their jobs. And in the end, he drove home with something far greater than satisfaction. He drove home with power.